Like you
Yeah.
can read about bear markets, you can read as much as you can about investing in the stock market, you can read every single book, but
Hmm.
until you make that jump, like it's only going to get you so far. Like the
That's true.
real teacher is the stock market itself.
Yeah, ayy, the market hustle, helping you to succeed, teaching like nobody else. Financial empowerment, giving you strategies for generational wealth, so you can start helping yourself. More money for you to be getting. This the moment for you to be winning and be living financially independent.
What is up, everybody, and welcome back to another Market Hustle episode. This is episode 18, and today we're going to tackle a very important concept, which is essentially the difference between saving and investing. So if you spend any time or any just time exploring the financial world, you'll quickly get bombarded by the concept of saving, right? Society in general tends to kind of influence or push people to save when it comes to improving their financial situations. And on one end, saving is a very important concept. Like I'm not saying it's not a good concept, but at the same time, saving will only get you so far. So today in this podcast, I have with me Pierce and Bafi, both of our lovely co-hosts, and we're just going to break down this specific concept and help people who are currently maybe in the saving stage or even in the paying down debt stage to understand the next level of this financial game, which is the investing stage. And just for a little bit of context to help you understand how important the next stage is, saving $650 per month would make you a millionaire in about 128 years. I don't know about you, but that's a little bit too long for me personally. However, investing $650 per month would make you a millionaire in about 27 years. 27 years. So significantly shorter time frame. And this is exactly why we invest. So we're going to dive into this topic a lot deeper. Before we do that, I want to just introduce our co-host. They're back again for another episode, episode 18. Let's start with Bafi. Bafi, how are you doing today, my friend?
I'm feeling good, man. Feeling good. The weather has not been great, but I'm excited because I know I've been talking about some of the trips I got planned this year. And this Friday coming up, I'm definitely taking over and heading to Poland. So if we have anybody from Poland, that area that listens to this podcast, don't hesitate to give me the places to check out, the food to eat, historical sites to visit. I'm very much looking forward to it. So that's really kind of where I'm at and super excited for this trip. Friday is also payday. So anybody that got paid, whether this Friday that just passed or this Friday that is coming, make sure you are paying yourself first. And we're tackling the two most important areas in being able to pay yourself, which is saving and investing.
Great to have you back, man. Yeah, and I can't wait to see all the pictures and hear all the stories with your Poland trip. That sounds like it's going to be such a great time.
Oh, yeah.
Pierce, how about you, my friend? How are things going on your end?
72 degrees in Southern California. I mean, just got off work a little bit ago. Enjoying the spring to summer weather right now, so can't complain about much, man. Just super happy to be here and happy to give everyone some information they may or may not already know.
Awesome stuff. Well, great to have you back as well, Pierce. Yeah, same with me. Out here in Seattle, the weather has been amazing. The last few days have just been sunny, above 60 degrees, no rain. Anytime it's not raining, I'm happy. So it's a great time out here as well. So let's just jump right in, right? So, a lot of people are pretty familiar with the concept of saving, right? I feel like we don't really have to dive into that concept too much. But the one thing that I've noticed is once you kind of graduate, or like once you really start to nail down that saving part, like once you have a good system in place where you're putting away some money, you're spending less than you're making, and you're starting to grow that savings account. Like once you're at that point, it's important to start considering what the next level is, right? Like the one thing I always tell people, especially like coaching clients that I work with, is you got to realize that there's different levels to this game, right? Like somebody who is, living paycheck to paycheck, they're not really ready for that investing level. But somebody who has kind of gotten to the point where they're spending less than they're making and they're actively putting some money into their savings account, the next step is super, super important. And that is investing. And the first question, I guess we'll just kind of run through real quickly is it possible to have too much money in your savings account? And I'll let one of our co-hosts kind of start this one off to kick it off. Bafi or Pierce, feel free to jump on in and give your thoughts.
I would love to hear Pierce's perspective on this, if you don't mind doing us the honor.
I not at all. So it's funny that we're having this topic of the podcast right now because I think it was earlier today. I was texting with Josh and Boffy guys, and I was mentioning one of my work friends, and he was talking to me about how he has a decent amount of money saved, $35,000. And so I'm like, okay, man, like what are you doing with it? He goes, what do you mean? It's just sitting in my bank account. And so I'm talking to him about the pros and cons of investing. And even if you don't want to invest your money into stocks, you can invest your money into money market funds, which grow your money exponentially more than, a normal bank account would at 0.1%. Because he's showing me how he's getting interest payments and how his money's making money. And he's getting like $1.22 of interest payments. And I'm like, dude, that's not what you're like hoping for. That's not the goal, And so there comes a point to where you have enough money saved to where you have 3 to 6 months expenses. You have even more than that in some cases, depending on your expenditures. And so my buddy I was talking to has no expenses except for food that he wants to buy. And so I'm telling him now, like, hey man, maybe the next step for you is to start getting invested in your retirement into a different brokerage account to the stock market, time to dip your toes in it. But yeah, no, I think there definitely is a point to where you can save too much money because it doesn't do anything for you just sitting in the bank account. It's more of just like a safety net,
Yeah, I mean, that's perfectly said, Pierce. And ultimately, one of the biggest risks when it comes to saving, well, let me back up a little bit. There is a risk to saving. Like a lot of people think saving is like the safest option for your hard-earned cash, right? Like when you're spending your time, you're working hard, whatever job you have, and you're starting to stack up some coins or stack up some cash. You don't want to just lose it. You don't want to just put it into an account and it just evaporates, right? Like a lot of people want to avoid that situation. But there's a common misconception where people tend to think that a savings account is safe. But one of the biggest risks to savings accounts is actually something that I feel like society has gotten a lot more familiar with in the last few years, which is inflation. Inflation is one of the biggest risks to cash just sitting around doing nothing. If your cash is idle, just sitting in an account, it is getting eaten away by inflation every single day. Especially when we go through periods of, just higher inflation, when that printing press is hot and there's more money flowing through the economy, that makes your cash sitting into your savings account less valuable. So completely agree with you, Pierce, that there definitely is a point to where, saving, like, don't get me wrong, is important up to a certain amounts. And then you got to start to graduate to the next level of like, okay, now I got to make my money do more work for me rather than just sit in my account doing nothing and collecting dust. But Boffy, let's hear your thoughts on this question. Do you have any perspectives to kind of add to this point as well?
For sure. I think, you can definitely have too much savings, to both of your credits. And I'm going to try and summarize it in a high level on 5 main points as to why, it can have a negative impact on your financial well-being if you oversave or you have too much in your savings, right? So the first, what Josh just highlighted, is inflation risk, right? And this is important because inflation went up to 9%. Now we're back to sub 3 and we're trying to get to 2. That can take a little while to get to 2, right? But what people also need to understand about inflation is that when inflation comes down, it doesn't mean prices of goods and services come down. It simply means that the prices of goods and services go up slower, right? So over the long term, everything is really going up regardless. So having money in your savings won't even keep up with inflation risk, right? Because you're losing money, you're losing buying power. And so that's the first risk to your money if you have too much in savings. The second is really missed investment opportunities, right? How many times do you go online and you hear about these podcasts or these posts that state, hey, if you bought the S&P 500 10 years ago, or if you bought Amazon at its IPO, or if you bought NVIDIA 10 years ago, how much you would have made, right? These are all missed investment opportunities for your money to grow and work harder than you do when it comes to working for money, right? And so that leads me to the next highlight or, category, which is really opportunity cost. Essentially what you missed out on and what you're missing out on by not investing the excess savings that is not necessary to be sitting in your savings, right? And so you don't want to miss out on a lot of these opportunities that are available. And then, fourth is really emergency fund overload. You can completely overload it and overdo it, right? And I think once you really understand, you have about 6 to 8 months of emergency fund, or even a year, depending on your financial responsibility, right? Some of our listeners might be parents, so therefore they need a little bit more safety net. Some of them
Mhm.
have higher monthly expenses because maybe they have a mortgage, they have a few other things they're responsible for. And so once you kind of get past, ideally, maximum, in my opinion, should be about 1 year of monthly expenses saved. After that, everything can basically go to work, right? And the last piece really here is psychological impact. Having too much cash in savings account can definitely impact you negatively because it leads you to a false sense of security, which is also what Josh and Pierce both highlighted, right? You feel secure, you get complacent, and you forget that there's a lot more that you need to do aside from just putting money in your savings. So I'll leave it at those 5 high level points summarized, and then we'll as the conversation continues, we're gonna dive deeper into other areas too.
Definitely, man. No, that was a great summary, Boffy. Thank you for that. And it kind of reminds me when I was out in Arizona for my cousin's wedding a couple of weeks ago. I got a lot of questions about just money in general from the family, from friends,
That's great
and
though. That's
it was
good,
awesome.
right?
No, it
Because
was
it's always good when you see family and friends actually like, hey, what is your thoughts on this?
yeah.
What about this? And they're asking questions. This is I love it. I love seeing that. And anybody that's listening to the podcast, I encourage you to continue asking questions because that's how you get answers.
Man, no, I loved it. It was great to see people more interested, because my family's been listening to my podcast. They've been seeing my posts. Like when I was there at the wedding, like I tried my best. Like obviously we're trying to enjoy the wedding, but at the same time, I was trying to answer as many questions as I could because when you have somebody who is actually interested and engaged with like wanting to learn more about this stuff, to me, that's the most like fun to like actually help with. Like it's the most rewarding work in my eyes to like help people improve their financial situation, especially if they're eager to learn. But all that being said, so it was actually one of my good cousin's friends, and I've known him for a couple of years, but he basically came up to me. He's like, Josh, I got $20,000 sitting in my savings account. It was like a Chase savings account, earning 0.01% per month. He's like, I've just been sitting here just throwing money into it every paycheck. My bills are very low. Like he had like his bills were like $2,500 a month. Like all of his expenses added up to like $2,500 a month. And he's just like, I'm just throwing everything extra into my savings account, but I don't know what to do now. He's like, I want to make this cash work. Like, what do I do? What's the next step? Should I just keep saving? And of course, we got to talking. I sat there and we went through trying to figure out like what's your short term goals. Are you trying to buy a house? Are you trying to like start a business? And ultimately, he wanted to buy a home in the next few years. That was kind of like his North Star, like his major goal, if you will. So I went through, first I kind of explained that, hey, right now you're earning 0.01%, which is practically nothing. And when we account for inflation, you're actually losing money on that 20 grand that's just sitting in that account every single month. And of course that was worrisome to him. You don't want to be losing purchasing power every month. So, I went through and explained some different options. I was like, you don't want to go to like towards the stock market route if you're going to need this cash within the next couple of years, because the stock market is a long-term gain. You don't want to put money in there that you're going to need within the next couple of years. So the best route for you is finding accounts or places where there's lower risk, but you can earn some sort of return that will kind of offset inflation a little bit and ideally give you a little bit more than inflation. And one of those we talked about was a high yield savings account. So we went through and I kind of explained, Ally Bank. That's one of my favorite banks. That's typically what I recommend people to go through because they're one of the more reputable banks and they are paying 4.25%. So I explained that to him. And he's currently in the process of transitioning that money from Chase to that Ally Bank. So he's going to be going from 0.01% to 4.25% per year. So he's going to be earning significantly more and ideally above inflation to protect that cash in order to achieve his goal in 2 years to buy a home, saving up for that down payment. So, it's super eye-opening, and you never really know kind of what's, where people are at in their money stage, if you will. A lot of the financial people that I talk to, because like I talk to some like sharp financial advisors like all the time. And a lot of them like forget that people are at just different stages. Like there's a lot of people who don't understand what a high yield savings account is. And maybe some of the listeners that are currently listening, this is the first time they've heard that there's an option out there where they can earn significantly more from their savings without any real additional risk, right? It's just a different type of savings account. And the one question he had, he asked me, he's like, Josh, Like, is there any like cost to this account? Like, do I have to pay a fee? Do I have to talk to an advisor or something? I was like, no, you literally just go to Ally Bank, Google Ally Bank savings account, high yield savings account. There's a big purple button. You put open now. And then once you open the account, there's no fees. There's no annual or monthly checking fees. You just transfer the money over and it's going to start earning that interest every month. So it was really cool to kind of to see his eyes open up to what's possible, like the different routes, just the different options. Like a lot of people aren't aware of like the different options that are available for their cash, So that was really cool. But I guess the next question that I tend to see people have, or just for both of you, is how much would you recommend somebody to keep in a savings account? Because like, of course, we're big advocates of having some sort of emergency fund. But if you had to give somebody a specific number or just a metric to kind of aim for, like what would you say to somebody who was asking how much they should keep in their savings and how much they should invest after that?
Yeah, great point, man. And I think I'm gonna answer it in like a multi-step tier because everybody situation is different, like you mentioned. But I think the first most important step, anybody listening, if you haven't, figured this part out, is number one, get to 3 months savings, 3 month savings of your monthly expenses as quickly as possible. In fact, forget investing if you haven't sorted out having a few thousands of dollars or something like that in your savings, because it won't do you no good, to be honest, right? So get to 3 months as quickly as possible. The next tier is really 6 months, depending on one's income and responsibilities, right? But ultimately, and this is like the holy grail, right, is 1 year of monthly expenses saved. Once you have that in place, you are set, you are golden. And basically every money that comes in, any new money, incoming money, the excess of that should basically go to investments, right? Because when you have a one year savings, it's a huge mental boost, huge physical boost, right? On top of that, it gives you a certain level of security where generally for most of us, if we lose a job, we can find something or find a combination of things to do to kind of help generate income within less than a year, right? And so after that 1 year of savings, pump everything into your money printing machine. And money does not grow in trees, but it certainly grows in assets, and aka stock market, aka real estate, and so forth. So in my opinion, that's really the tier. So 3 months, 6 months, 1 year. After 1 year, put all the money to work.
Bafi, just a follow-up question on that. So at what point would you recommend somebody to like kind of start the investing journey? Would it be after that 3 month milestone? Or, I mean, of course, like it's always going to depend on the situation, but I'm just curious to say, like, at what point should somebody start to focus from or shift their focus from savings to investing?
I love that question because it's actually not a savings number per se to get to the point of investing, though the savings is important. That's the first step, right? But I think is what really stops people from getting to the investment stage is the lack of financial education, understanding of the economy, the stock market, right? How the financial systems really actually operate. And so, in my opinion, if somebody's just kind of starting from scratch, as you're saving, right, whether you're saving to the 3 months or the 6 months, as you're saving, you should also simultaneously be learning about how these things work. Because even if you have a year worth of savings and you don't know how these things work, you're going to have that fear of graduating from savings to investing, right? And to reduce that fear is to know how these things work. And that is the beautiful thing about this podcast is we here to serve as a resource and give you the context and information you need to be able to graduate. So for the most part, I would say the 6 month is really like the sweet spot. So after you have 6 months worth of savings, yes, you should start at least investing and taking advantage of 401k primarily if you have at your job, right? Roth IRA if you create your own, and then maybe ultimately a taxable brokerage account. But the good news is the learning part in being able to graduate to investing doesn't cost you a penny. It costs you watching some episodes on here. That's it. And following us on social media. That's really it, right? And so save, and then, as you're saving, learn, and then it'll help you graduate over.
That makes sense to me. Yeah. And you touched on a good point there as well, Bafi, where there is kind of like that hesitation to jump into the investing world because of how overwhelming it can seem, just because there's so many different options to pick from, right? Like there's stocks, like even if we zoom out from just asset classes, when it comes to investment options. Like we have stocks, we have real estate, we have like maybe you want to open up a business, or maybe you want to buy an existing business, or even crypto, whatever you're kind of interested in. There's so many different options out there. So like I completely get that it can be overwhelming for somebody who's like already mastered the saving stage. Like maybe they have 3 months of expenses saved up, 6 months of expenses saved up, or whatever, and they're kind of ready to start chipping away at the investing game. Yeah, so it could definitely be overwhelming, and we will touch on some tips to kind of graduate from the savings to the investing stage in just a little bit. But I want to get Pierce's thoughts. Like, what would you tend to recommend to friends who ask you, like, "Hey, Pierce, how much money should I have saved up, and at what point, like, should I start to consider investing?" Like, what do you typically tell the people in your circle?
I mean, it's pretty subjective. I mean, it's one of those questions that it's like, you need to kind of know everything about that person. What do they spend their money on? How much do they spend it on? What are their priorities? What are their goals? What, so on and so forth. But for people who have who have mastered like the savings, you have the fundamentals down to already invest. For most people that I see, it's risk tolerance. There, it's super safe. I mean, in a sense, it's safe to have your money in the account, right? Let's say you have $35,000 sitting in an account one day. You could check tomorrow, and you're gonna have 35 grand. And so for most people, it's like it's the peace of mind.
Mm,
Um, and so for my friend group, it's getting those people adapted to seeing the ebbs and flows of the market. If you are getting past that point to where you have enough money saved and you have everything, set in place to where you can start dipping your toes into the investing world. And so it's the ebbs and flows. It's, like I always tell my friends, try not to get emotionally attached to what you have invested, because like I was telling Josh and Boffy, like last month, it was a good month for me. But 2 to 3 days into April, it's like I'm almost down 6 grand. So it's a very subjective thing to where it's your risk tolerance. It's how much you have, how much you're willing to spend, investing and whatnot. It's one of those questions. There's kind of no right or wrong answer for how much you want to put in, because at my age right now, I have no bills, dude, none at all. So anybody that listens, if you're in the same circumstances I am, try to take advantage of where you're at right now, because you're gonna get so far ahead, by taking these advantages of just saying, okay, I have no monthly expenses right now, so I can just dump all the money into the stock market, or I can just dump my money into my Roth IRA. And so
yeah.
yeah, I mean, like Boffy pretty much covered all of it. I mean, just it's very subjective.
It is, and it definitely depends on like where you're at in your life. Like if you're younger and you have the opportunity to live with your parents, where you can like save on money, especially if you're just getting started in life, like it is ideal. Like you might not need as much savings to
Exactly.
graduate from saving to investing. And like Pierce said, it's good to take advantage of that opportunity, right? Because this is the one period of your life, if you're young and you have your parents are kind of helping support you, like take advantage of it, right? Like you're literally getting a step ahead of the game. And then of course, like not everybody's in that situation. Like maybe you're older, maybe you're 35, maybe you do, you kind of have a risky job. Like maybe your job's like not super stable. It's going to be better for somebody who has a little bit of a choppy job to have a higher savings, like before they start the investing journey, right? Like maybe you should aim for the 6 month mark, like, and before you start investing, like try to build up a savings of 6 months. That way, if something, God forbid, happens to your job, you're not going to be left without anything. You're going to be able to like survive. You're going to keep yourself afloat for 6 months. So you're going to have that safety net. And having that safety net, kind of like what Boffy touched on as well, is going to help give you that confidence to graduate from the savings and deal with the emotional turmoil of the stock market that sometimes occurs, where, especially as a newer investor, like the first few red days that you see, it's going to be hard. Like it's not going to be easy. Like you don't just jump into this game and know, kind of understand it and not control your emotions right away. Like that is experience. Like that takes time to really master. So it is more of a subjective question of like how much should you have saved up. But the way I kind of frame it out is I think almost everybody would benefit from having at least 3 months of expenses saved up in their accounts. And then if your job or your career path is more risky, then you're going to want to have like more on the higher ends. You're going to probably want to have closer to like 6 months. If you're like an entrepreneur and you're like constantly starting new businesses, you might even want to have closer to a year. If you're constant, or even if you're like job hopping, like the answer really kind of depends on like how stable your income source is, how stable your active income. If you work in like an insurance industry and they're, the company you're at's like never done layoffs ever, like you could probably have closer to the 3 month mark, so it's really just kind of gauging your situation. Like, how are your expenses looking? Do you have a family? Are you supporting kids? Are you is your job risky or not? Like, that's going to kind of answer like how much money you should have before you graduate. But once you are ready, once you have determined that, hey, I have enough money in the savings account, I've got like 6-7 months of savings in my high yield savings account or whatever, I'm ready to start this investing journey.
Mm-hmm.
Bafi, you touched on an important point. Like, it is kind of like that analysis paralysis, I would say, where you start to dig down or dive down that rabbit hole of, let's start learning about investing. Let's learn how to kind of get started in this game. I'm curious though, like, what would you tell somebody who is, maybe they got their savings is good and they're ready to kind of take the next
Right.
step? Like, what would you tell them to get started along this investing journey?
Dude, before I even answer that question, not to go on a quick tangent, but I think there's a story that I want to share with everybody quickly, and it's a personal story, right? And so, a lot of people listening might think we're the subject matter experts and we are perfect at it, and we execute flawlessly. But at the end of the day, we're just human, just like you. We have the same pain points, same challenges throughout our day-to-day lives as well, right? And so many can relate and find some comfort knowing that it's okay to not execute everything like Warren Buffett, right? So, quick story. I started investing before I had 3 months worth of savings, right? And the portfolio started off pretty well. I was doing great. I'm like, I definitely felt like Warren Buffett. I'll tell you that much. Okay. Until life had another life lesson for my ass. Okay. So I ended up having to actually use my investments to service some short term emergencies and so forth. And then, the lesson that I really learned there was, hey, you can't skip stages when it comes to wealth building, and then some of you might be listening and watching, and you might feel embarrassed by some of the decisions you've made, whether from savings to investing, investing to savings. But don't, because at the end of the day, if we can't make fun of ourselves, we can't, speak on some of these things and make light of it. It is really tough. So, but the point is, we've all been there, and we all didn't start off at the top, right? We all started off at the bottom. And so, when it comes to being ready for that next stage, and investing, once you're ready, the most important investment is always going to be you. Forget the money for a minute, because your brain is the most important thing that's worth investing into. And so before you put money in the market, before you just go on a tangent listening to everything and everybody on social media of all the million of different things you could put your money into, take a moment and just breathe, right? Like, take a moment to breathe and understand that, number one, these asset classes are not going nowhere. Number two, there are unlimited opportunities, and you're going to get your fair share. You're going to get your piece of the pie, more than enough, actually, right? And number three, it won't happen overnight, right? So just kind of taking those foundational pieces in place and then making the jump to, okay, let me learn about which ones I might find interesting, like which type of asset class I might be interested in. And then finding out the pros and the cons is important to get both sides of the coin so you can make a well-informed decision. And then after that, you kind of lean into, okay, if I'm going, let's say I'm going with the stock market, where can you want to be the laziest investor possible? That's really the cheat code here, right? What can I do in the simplest way to get the highest return on my money? Not just return on investment, but return on my time, return on my mental state, and everything involved. And then you kind of start there and you learn about those things as you go. So I recommend, before you even put money in the market, definitely listen to some of these podcasts, follow us, check out some things, do some research on Google and YouTube. Use ChatGPT as well. You know what I mean? There's a lot of information on there. You don't have to spend 50 million hours trying to Google everything. Sometimes you can take the shortcut approach, and ChatGPT might just give you some few generic things to kind of keep in mind and consider, right? Once you have those things in place, maybe you might spend $20 on a book, and that's something that we tend to do a pretty good job of with some of the book recommendations. $20 on a book, maybe 30 to $50 on a course. Get a little bit more familiar with the space, with the environment, with the language, right? And that's where the conviction is going to come from when you begin to actually put money in the market. So invest in yourself, and then, put some money in the market. And this cheap, fastest way to get there. So it's funny because there's a saying, slow is good and good is fast. Okay, so everybody think fast is always good. That's not necessarily the case. Slow is actually the fastest way to get there. So put some money in the market, buy yourself some index funds and ETFs, and then continue learning. Eventually, you can graduate into individual stocks, or if you're into real estate, you can graduate to multiple properties over time. But
Yeah.
definitely don't want to go fast.
That's great. Well said, man. And just to kind of add on to that, like it's also important to remember that you're not too late. There are multiple waves to this game. Like you're never going to be too late. And opportunity in general is abundant, right? Like this entire world is abundant, and there's always going to be more opportunity that kind of flows your way. So a very big mistake that I tend to see newer investors make is where they just kind of feel like they are about to miss out. Like they have that fear of missing outs just hanging over their shoulders, and they feel like if they don't jump into the market right now, they're done. Like they're never going to be able to retire. They're never going to be able to hit financial freedom. And the one thing I want to remind you to that person specifically, so if that resonates to anybody, is you are not too late. There's going to be plenty of opportunity out there. The stock market, the investing world, the finance world, it's abundant, right? There's constantly going to be opportunities that are out there. It literally comes in waves. Like maybe you missed a wave, that's fine. There's going to be another wave to jump on. Like there's going to be plenty of more waves to jump on. And of course, that doesn't mean like drag your feet and don't learn this stuff. Like, of course, you still want to try to like learn it as fast as possible so you can actually get started. But at the same time, don't think that it's too late to ever get started. Don't think you've missed out on all the opportunity to be had. This stock market, the stock market is one of the greatest wealth creators in the world. It's constantly generating wealth for several people, for tons of people, for lots of Americans, for millions of people. So don't think that you're done, like there's no opportunity, because there's still plenty of opportunity to be had. There will be more opportunity to be had in the future, especially as technology continues to advance, as AI starts to become a bigger talk and part of the equation of business in general. Like this is just going to expand the amount of opportunity that's available for everybody. So that's an important point that I wanted to just add on to Bafi's well summarized just topic on the investing beginning stages. But another thing that I think is important to touch on is just like what is good to save for, like what should be saved, and at what points should that money just like be thrown in the investing world. So for one, like I think we kind of touched on it pretty well, is having an emergency fund is a great reason to have money in your savings, right? Like you want to have some money that's kind of set aside that could potentially cover all of your bills for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 months, right? Like that's a great reason to have some savings. Another one would be kind of like what I touched on about with the guy I talked to at the wedding, is like maybe you're saving for a house. Maybe you want to buy a house in a couple of years. Like that's a great reason to have some money into the savings. But Bafi and Pierce, like maybe you have some additions to add to the list of what you should have cash for in your savings.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, man. And good points you just made there. I'll just add only two. And one thing I've realized is everybody enjoys life experiences, entertainment, fun, right? Leisure things that help them recharge from like the daily grind and the daily stress. So the two things that you should be saving for, especially in the short term, is saving for fun, right? Save some money up so then at the end of the month you can go to the movies with your significant other or friends, or maybe you want to go see your favorite artist who's performing. I mean, these days Taylor Swift is perhaps the global icon for concerts, and so is Beyonce, right? So you want to save for fun things that really, really enhances your life experience and helps you recharge so you can stay consistent and balancing out the long-term vision, long-term goals versus short-term. So save for fun. I love to eat, so I save so that I can go out and eat with that money, right? So, and then also save for trips. These days, many people like trips, especially since the pandemic. We're learning that there's a lot more things to explore. The advent of being able to work remotely and hybrid positions. Now with AI, that's also going to help foster that productivity. Like Josh mentioned, these businesses are adopting it. And so you want to save for trips. The issue is when we kind of take on these leisure activities and entertainment without really having fitting them in our plans, right? Because it's like, yeah, you pay the price up, you kick the can down the road and you just go enjoy it. But then when you come back, now you got to work 3 times as long, 3 times as hard just to get back to ground zero, right? When you kind of flip it, save for it in the beginning, when you go, you don't give a damn. You are turning up. You are having fun. You're not worried about the bill afterwards. You're not worried about, oh, now I got to go back and pay the credit card. You can truly enjoy that moment, experiences, and embrace it fully. So that would be my two fun things, especially the summer's coming up, man. The summer's coming
It
up, guys.
is.
Save some money for all the things you want to enjoy.
Great points. How about you, Pierce? Any things that you would add on to potentially save for?
I like donating. I mean, if you don't have money at the point in your life right now, you don't have to donate necessarily money. But like one thing that a couple of my buddies and I are going to start doing is, I'm into cars for everybody who doesn't know. So I'm going to be starting a canned food drive. And so I'm very, very fortunate to be in a situation to where a lot of people around me have a decent amount of wealth. And so it's in one of those situations that, you show up in a $400,000 car, you can bring a can of food, you know? And so I like being able to save to be able to give back to people. And also for like what Boffy said, like, dude, I like to eat, just as much, so I always save for going on trips with my friends, or save, oh, my girlfriend wants this new purse, or like, oh, I want this new watch, or I want this new wallet, or this new jacket. And so it's like being able to serve a greater cause better than myself. Like, I always put myself first when it comes to investing and stuff like that. But once I have all those key points taken, they're all crossed off. I like to be able to give give people stuff. So if I can't give my money right now, I'll give you my time. And if I can't give my time, I'll give you my knowledge, because it's not always monetary things that you have to give. You can, in a situation that's like, you have a family in the hospital, you can give them a hug, but you could give them the hug and pay off their hospital bills.
Help
So
them
it's like,
out. Yeah.
which one's a little bit better? So it's just, it's subjective, but I just love giving. So that's, I think part of the reason that all three of us are here today is that we were given our knowledge, our time to be able to give people the opportunity to learn these, subjects.
I love that, Piers. That's so powerful because that's these are some of the things that we need more of in our society, right? Because things get difficult, life gets complicated, and so when you have the means, because you've been saving, right? Because you've been investing, because you've taken steps and you've learned things, maybe the hard way at times,
Oh yeah.
you're willing to pay forward, you're willing to give back to those that can benefit from it, not just in money, but in time, in energy, in education. So that is such a beautiful statement right there. And that's an incredible sentiment. And anybody that's listening to this podcast, make sure that, you understand that also in part in giving is not always money as well. That's very important, right? You might be listening to this podcast, and because of that, it's helped you save or understand your money blueprint better, and it helped you improve your money relationship. Guess what? We all have a friend or two or some family members that can also benefit from that, right? So feel free to also give and share where you're getting your information and knowledge from, so they can also benefit, right? Because this is we can all win. This, like Josh stated it earlier, like it's literally abundant. There's no scarcity in this, and we're living in a time where you are one podcast away, one episode. We're on episode 18, right? So you're literally 18 episodes away from getting so much valuable information that people pay $50,000 at universities for, right? So make sure you're definitely giving back and paying it forward to those that can benefit for real. Great point, Piers. I really like that sentiment.
Thanks, man. I mean, it's just one of those things that, we're all, even in most ways in people's lives, if you're not given money, you're given, you're used to giving in your life. So if you have the means to it, absolutely just do it.
Yeah. Josh, oh, actually, I got a quick question, man. I'm curious now because now I'm like, when did you two make the jump from savings to investing? And what was that experience like, right? Like, because there's like a little bridge, there's like a gap. So it's like savings, and then it's like a dash, and then investing, right? Like, what was the dash? What was the dash experience for the both of you guys?
I want to hear Josh's point of view on this.
Yeah, well, ultimately, like it did take me some time to like really implement the saving part because it didn't. I came from a background where money topics weren't really talked about as much. Like my dad did try to kind of like show from example like what not to do, basically. Like he kind of trialed and error through his life. So that did help. But ultimately, like once I kind of nailed down the savings portion, and that was like much easier than the investing part. Like that's putting away some cash into the savings account is pretty easy. It's more of just like really tackling that habit and building that consistent and that discipline, that financial discipline into your own life. But like once you get that down, when I was ready, it was definitely difficult to like jump into the investing world because I had so many conflicting just thoughts in my head from all the research I was doing. You know, on one end, I had people saying that you have to kind of be the next Wolf of Wall Street. You know, like you got to go in through this with like with a trading mindset. You know, you got to try to find the one company that's going to go in 10x and hopefully you get lucky. And then on the other end, like I had people just saying like, oh, go talk to a financial advisor. They'll kind of, you know, manage all your money for you, and it's the safest route to go. And ultimately, I shared this story in the first episode. I went to a financial advisor and I just didn't have enough money at the time. So they just kind of like, yeah, sorry, I can't help you. So I had to kind of just learn myself, which is fine. You know, it made me who I am today, which is great because I can share everything I've learned to everybody out there who maybe are in similar situation that I was 10 years ago. But I will say the first couple of years were pretty difficult. Like it was a lot of trial and error for myself. Like I tried the stock picking route. I tried penny stocks. And ultimately, like what really kind of changed the game for me is when I found ETFs and index funds. Like that's when everything just completely changed. And I remember the first year like that I started to really implement the index fund route. It was the first year I was profitable, but like it all just kind of like clicked in my head. It was just like this moment of just like aha, like I understood. I'm like this is what I need to focus on. And ultimately like the best way that I was able to like really manage my emotions and not let it impact me was by automating as much as I could, by being consistent with it and like setting up automatic contributions. And most brokerages nowadays will allow you to set up like automatic payments where you can like set like $20 a week or $50 a week, or like every time you get paid, it will take it from your paycheck and automatically invest in stocks. Because what I found is if you are manually going in there every paycheck, you kind of add in this factor of potentially screwing something up, right? Because like we're all human. We're all, you know, it's impossible to be 100% emotionless unless you're a psychopath. So, you know, there's going to be moments where like maybe it's like the nastiest bear market that we've ever experienced, where you're going to start to question, like, should I continue to invest in these stocks? Like, why am I throwing money when my portfolio continues to go red every single week, you know? And, you know, as you go through a couple bear market cycles, you'll start to understand that that's just part of the game. But when you go through your first bear market, you're going to have those thoughts. You're going to be like, why am I doing this? The stock market's continually going down and I'm just bleeding money and I keep throwing money at it and it just keeps going down. Like that can last for a year or even longer. So in order to, you know, take yourself out of the equation, what I found that worked really well for myself was to just automate it as much as possible, to set up those automatic contributions, pull in straight from my bank account into my investment account, automatically buying those stocks without me having to even be in the equation. Like that was a complete game changer after I discovered the ETFs.
Mm-hmm. No, that's fire, man. Great point there. That's because it's interesting because the sooner you actually get into the market or get investing, the faster you actually learn how to navigate the environment, what is ideal, what is not. Like Josh said, he started off, you know, picking individual stocks a bit, penny stocks a little bit. It's better to make these learn about these things earlier than say later when you're 40 or 45 or 50, right? Because at that point you don't have as much wiggle room to make as many mistakes and learn from those mistakes, right? So definitely get involved, get going. I started off kind of similar a little bit, like I was picking individual stocks, and I like at one point had like 70 individual stocks in my portfolio. And I'm like, wait a minute, I just created my own damn index. Why the hell am I doing it this way? So I pivoted as well too. But yeah, looking forward to your response, Pierce.
For me, it was it was a little bit different than most people's situation. You know, I grew up going to a financial class with my dad that he was teaching at our church. And so it was a Dave Ramsey's Financial Peace University for anybody who doesn't know. So that taught me how to save, the power of savings and investing, you know, very early on in my life. And so as a reward, you know, of going with my dad, we'd always stop by Starbucks. My dad would always get me, you know, a caramel frappuccino. Shout out Starbucks. But so having that jump was it was not normal for me because I didn't grow up the way I am now. And so what really got me kicked off is that, you know, I had the savings dialed, right? And then, you know, God blessed me in my life with a substantial amount of money. And so it really had to make me learn, you know, it's either I was going to sink or I was going to swim. And so I really had to get a grasp of what I'm going to do with this money that I just got. And so the money could either just sit there in a bank account and accumulate, 0.01 interest, or I could make this money work for me. And so I was blessed enough to have a financial advisor, my dad's guy, take over, my situation. And it was like, okay, cool. He's doing all this, so I don't have to really worry about it. But I didn't take that route. For me, it was like I had to absolutely understand what this money's doing and what I'm investing in. So it was a super eye-opening event. And so I needed to identify all these things very early on in my life of risk tolerance, how long I'm investing for, what I'm investing in, so on and so forth.
Powerful. Love it. I was like hearing like that dash, right? That in between, because yeah, investing is like, all right, cool, you've arrived there, that's great. But it's like, what are the things that led you there and the thought process behind that? Because I feel like that's some of the hardest areas for people to think through, going from savings, even going to savings, right? It's like a huge psychological process that has to take place. And then from savings to investing, another layer of shift in psychological and decision making that goes in place. And then, like you said, you see your money go down and you're like, oh shit, is this it? Like,
Well, and even just to touch on that a little bit more, I think also I'm just trying to think back to like 10 years ago because that was so long ago. But what also kind of really like motivated me to like jump into the game was just seeing other people make money, right? Like where I saw people, with their portfolios, like I'd see people with like $10,000 gains in like a month, and I was like, what the hell? Like they're making money from just their portfolio. Like they're not actually having to clock in or anything. I'm like, I got to learn more about this stuff. So like just seeing just the concept of like owning an asset and being paid money just by owning that asset, not having to clock in, not having to go to meetings, not having to manage people or worry about just company direction. Like all you had to do was just buy the asset and you just make money off of it. Like that was like very appealing to me. And I was like, I need to learn more about this. And I'm sure a lot of people, when they're brand new investors, can relate to that, because the whole reason why you're learning this stuff is so you can improve your financial future and ideally build a future where you don't have to sell your time, which is your most precious asset, for money, right? Like that's what we're all pretty much doing. Or maybe it's, once you get to that point, like maybe you want to build up additional money so you can, build generational wealth. Like maybe you want to help your kids have a head start in life, pay for their college, help them not have to go through some of those tough parts of life. And of course, like I think one of the common arguments to that, it's like, well, then they're not going to be like, built up in they're, the struggle is kind of like where the wisdom's built up. And like to an extent, I'll agree. But at the same time, like if you can, if you can avoid some of that struggle and just and help people kind of have a head start in life, like why not do that? Like, and like there's better, more efficient ways to learn the wisdom concepts than having to just sit there and struggle. So that's my thoughts on it. But ultimately, like that's why, we're all learning about this stuff while we're trying to improve our money is so we, build more options for our future and not have to, sell our time. Like it's more about like protecting our most precious asset, which is our own time.
well said, man. No, I think it's so important that we do speak on these concepts and topics, because it's there's so much information out there and it's scary. Like I can, because I try to put myself in somebody who's brand new, right? Let's say I didn't know all the things I knew about this entire space already, right? Like where the hell would I even begin to even like have the capacity or the open-mindedness, right? Or the awareness to be able to not, because there's so much information, but to be able to look at it and be like, okay, these are the right, this is the right information that's going to be more responsible, that's going to yield to better results, that's going to help develop the right mindset and all the decision making. In that I can even though in some cases it's easier these days because of all the resources that's available now, like with some of the work that we all do,
Mhm.
you can also see it as it's equally as difficult and as complicated. And then sometimes it leads to inaction because you're like, oh my God, so many things that you're like,
Yeah.
fuck it. My brain is about to bust. There's so much shit going on. I don't even know if I'm looking at the right things or going the right way. I'm just gonna kind of shut down, right? Like, what would you say to anybody that's kind of having that moment? Because right now it's insane, right? The last 3-4 years, because of COVID, we've had NFTs, we've had crypto, we've had stock market, we have real estate, And then we have even more other fungible tokens and more other stuff that just like PDF that costs like $1 million. Like, you know what I mean? Like all types of
Yeah.
different things into play. So it's like, what would you say to somebody who's having that mental difficulty of being able to navigate all of it?
I would say reach out to people who have done what you're trying to do, right? Like you're not the first person to go through this journey of navigating the complex financial world. Any investor has had to go through that initial stage, and it's almost more times than not, it's very choppy for most people because those first couple of years is more of you just developing your own strategy. And even it might even be longer than a couple of years, because what's not really discussed a lot is that, maybe you have one strategy in one phase of your life, but we're all human, so things change. Like maybe your goals will change, maybe things will kind of shift a little bit. So when your goals shift, then your strategy might shift as well. So like this investing game it's a complex journey because it's kind of like always in motion, just because life's always in motion, right? So I think on one end, like you just kind of have to be patient with yourself and be kind to yourself. And a lot of people want to have everything figured out right now. Like, just tell me what to do. I want to have all this figured out, and I'm not going to start until I have every little piece put together. And what's important to understand is that a lot of the important lessons won't truly be understood until you actually make that initial jump, right? Like you can read about bear markets, you can read as much as you can about investing in the stock market, you can read every single book, but until you make that jump, like it's only going to get you so far. Like the real teacher is the stock market itself. It's real experience. Yeah, it's like actually jumping in, buying your first stock, like and that's why I'm a big advocate of just like start small, start where you're at and start small. Like the sooner you jump in, the sooner you're going to be able to gain that experience, and the sooner you're going to be able to build that investor mindset in yourself, and then you're going to be able to just tweak things as you go. And most importantly, you're just going to understand what people are talking about better. It's like when you're reading these investing books and when you're just talking to other people trying to gather information, if you've already started, you're going to be able to connect the dots a lot easier.
Great points, man. And you made a really important point, which is basically the areas where you can't simulate, right? And that's really where a lot of the growth and the experience and the knowledge comes from. Because when you put your money in the market and you see it go down 10%, right? And your heart is beating, right? You can't simulate that from a book, or like you can't just kind of really conceptually take all that in and all the reactions, the way your body, your mind is going to operate. You can't get that from a book. You can't get that from a podcast. You can't get that from YouTube, right? And so definitely getting involved and getting that experience, exposure to it is so important, because most of investing is really a waiting game, a temperament game, being able to master your own self and your emotional urges, and also some of the things you see out there. It's easy to compare yourself to somebody else and forget that, hey, look, at one point that person also started from scratch, or they had to go through that experience journey and being in it to gain all the information to then make better decisions over time, right? And so you have to always kind of put things in the right perspective or in the right scope to allow you to be able to develop and not try to skip stages or compare yourself to others. Because you're right that when I first started, it was scary as hell, hands down, like the scariest thing, because you're like, oh shit, the money can go to zero. Oh wow, that's a possibility, right? And then things are happening, you're buying more, you're buying less, you're tweaking it, and strategies do change over time. I'm pretty sure the way most of us started off in the beginning when it comes to investing is not the same way we're investing now. And part of it is because we've probably read from the books and information and the best investors around the world, such as Warren Buffett and the like, and they've all said the same thing. But I can promise you, almost none of us actually really practice that from the beginning, right? We're like, oh, we tried it our own way, and that's fine. It's okay to do it that way too, and get experience. And then we realize, like, you know what? Yeah, these people were right, or like, that strategy was more effective. But if you do it your own way and things doesn't go according to plan, you don't get the results you expected out the gate, it's okay. Yeah, it's all part of the learning journey, the learning process. You can't expect to know and have everything figured out, especially in this area when you might not have had much experience or exposure to, or you're now learning about it. So it's okay to make mistakes And I've realized a lot of people, when they make some of these mistakes early on, it almost stops them from actually benefiting from it, or like using that lesson to turn that lesson into profit, right?
Mhm.
And so I want everybody that's listening to know that, hey, it's okay to start off, and maybe you heard something, you gave it a go, you tried it, or you bought something and you realize like, oh, maybe I shouldn't have bought it. And that's perfectly fine, right? It's completely okay. Don't think just because you hear these stories about people making insane amount of money and basically everything they touch like turns into gold. It doesn't mean that when you touch something and it didn't pan out that way, it doesn't mean that you're less intelligent. It doesn't mean that you're stupid. It doesn't mean that you don't have the potential or the opportunity to do better. It simply means that in that particular time, the decision that was made didn't pan out the way you wanted. And the thing is, we all make mistakes every day. And bring that same energy to the stock market game, right? When I go to work, I don't get everything right. I don't spell every word correctly. I don't add up all the calculations correctly every time. I don't always understand the conceptualize the process and the business and everything 100%. I make mistakes and I love it. And I think the more we can learn to embrace that mistake. Now, some mistakes you can't come back from. So those you just got to watch out for.
Tread lightly.
Right. And like to Josh's point, like, hey, start small. And so it's like, better to make smaller mistakes that you can recover and learn and use those mistakes to catapult into the next chapters of your life, rather than making a mistake that you might need half a lifetime to sort out,
Yeah, man, I completely agree. And just to kind of like summarize it a little bit, like it's kind of in line with what I've noticed, and a lot of other people have noticed as well, is that a lot of this game, like I would say like 99% of investing, is much more of a behavioral or psychology game, not necessarily an IQ game, which is also why it's hard to just sit there and read about it, because you won't really learn until you are in the game. Like that's when you learn, because like the most important part of investing is kind of how you react to what's going on. Right? It's like it's more of like learning about yourself, like how you behave in the stock market, how you react to things, because that's what's really important. But a lot of people kind of, they bring the mindset of, just different domains, like whether it's, school or whatever. They're just like, if I could just like read as much information, then I'll know exactly what to do and I'll be a millionaire in a year. Or one of the most common things I see is like people who, have lots of success in their life. Like maybe they're doctors, maybe they're lawyers, maybe they're engineers, and they're very, very sharp individuals. But they come to the stock market and they kind of ride that wave. They're like, oh, well, I'm very smart, I'm very intelligent. They bring kind of that mindset to like this completely different world, and they think because they've mastered one world, they'll easily just master this next world. And the stock market is very quick to humble people. If you kind of come in thinking you know what to do, when you haven't gone through those initial stages of just understanding how the game kind of works. So the stock market will always humble you. And that's also why it's important to just, start small. There's no reason to just rush into this with, all of your money and just throw it all into one stock and then, hope for the best. And not only start small, but start simple. I am a huge fan of index funds. If you follow the Market Hustle for any amount of time, you'll quickly find out that I tend to recommend VOO and QQQ. Those are my two favorite index funds. And the beautiful thing about index funds is that they hold hundreds and hundreds of companies, of stocks, in one stock. So you kind of get everything in just one stock. You don't have to worry about just picking the best one. You basically just get all the best companies rather than having to sit there and spend your energy trying to find the one that's going to maybe do well or maybe not. So for almost every beginner, I always recommend to start with index funds. And even, a lot of quote unquote experts or people who've been in this game, people who've been in for a while, like they still invest in index funds, because what you'll quickly find out as you go down the rabbit hole of investing and the stock market in general is that outperforming the stock market is much easier said than done. Warren Buffett, he's like the GOAT, the legendary man behind the stock market. Like he actually has a reputation of consistently outperforming the market. And when we say the market, we're referring to the S&P 500 index, which is the top 500 companies in the United States. Warren Buffett is one of the few individuals who has consistently outperformed the S&P 500. And even in recent years, he's actually kind of struggled with trying to like outperform that 10% roughly average of the S&P 500. And this is a guy who spends every waking moments like just learning as much as he can about different companies, about finance, about investing. Like this is a man who's dedicated his entire life to this game. And he's just one of the few individuals that have outperformed. He's kind of like the, Tiger Woods, like the professional of golf. He's like the Tiger Woods of the stock market. Like Warren Buffett's like one of the top 1% skill level of investing. Now, another thing to keep in mind is that there's a lot of individuals who work on Wall Street. There's, we got like money market funds, or we got like hedge funds, these individuals who kind of like run their own funds that try to kind of compete on Warren Buffett's level. And a crazy thing to learn about is when you realize that a good majority of them, I think the last statistic I saw was like 90% of hedge funds underperform the S&P 500 index, the stock market, on a long-term basis. Underperform. So these guys who, just like Warren Buffett, Warren Buffett's like one of the exceptions, but just like Warren Buffett, all these hedge funds, all these guys working on Wall Street, like they're all dedicating every waking hour to the stock market, to trying to outperform the stock market. They've gone to, the top colleges in the world, they're from Harvard, these guys are very, very intelligent people, but they still struggle to beat the stock market. That's how hard this game is. And that's also why I'm a huge fan of just, instead of trying to beat the stock market, just join the stock market, just get what the stock market's going to return and go live your life, focus on increasing your income. Cause like kind of what Bafi said in the beginning of this podcast, one of the best investments you'll ever be able to make is in your own skills. It's in yourself, right? Like that's where you're going to always see the best ROI, return on investment, is from investing, in your own education, investing in your own network, and just investing in your own skills.
Love that. I definitely want to highlight something Josh just mentioned, which is the data and the facts of 90% of these hedge funds and fund managers are underperforming the S&P 500, which is basically the entire stock market, right? And there's a good reason why. It is not because they're not smart. They're the smartest in the game, literally, in the business. They have the most resources, meaning information, on forecasting these models. They have the most information on what companies are doing or what companies thinking about doing. They have the fastest systems and processes to predict all these different outcomes. And yet they are still behind the stock market, right? And so there's a few things you can take from that statement, which is one, the professionals don't even know what the hell they're doing neither on a large scale, because that's how challenging and difficult it is to beat the market, right? Despite all these skills and knowledge and information, they still can't even beat it. Number two, you shouldn't think you're better than the market. Because if the professionals can't beat it, and you might not have as much time, as much resources, or as much energy to spend decades and decades trying to figure it all out, do not think that you are better than the market, because that's essentially trying to act like you know more than life itself, right? And so we have to be very cautious and understand our limitations, our circle of competence, our blind spots, and knowing that, hey, we can't predict and know everything that's happening even tonight or the next day, let alone a month, a year, 5, 10 years. And the further out you go, the less visibility you have in being able to predict anything accurately. And the third takeaway is, just because you see a stock go up 200% in a year, or you hear a bunch of things on the internet and all these things happening, it does not mean that that's how things are actually supposed to be performing on a healthy, responsible basis, right? And so if you are somebody out there who is getting the market return, you are doing better than 90% of these fund managers, hedge funds, and most of these people out here that are spending their entire day trying to decide where the stock market is going to take in the next 2 seconds, in the next 1 hour, in the next month. So kudos to you. Stick to that strategy, because it's going to make you more money while you actually do the least amount of work. Again, like I stated in the beginning of the episode today, you want to find the laziest and simplest ways to make the most money when it comes to stock market investing. And Josh just highlighted the best way to go about it.
And the cherry on the top with that one is that Warren Buffett, like the guy that we were just talking about, one of the guys that's actually has outperformed the market what he tends to recommend any investor, who's kind of new to the game to invest in is what we're talking about. S&P 500 index funds. VOO is something when, after he passes, I believe 90% of his wealth will be invested into an S&P 500 index fund, and the other 10% will be treasuries. So this, one of the greatest investors in the world alive, if he's advocating for this for most investors, that's a pretty strong statement, something to consider. Now, of course, I don't want to sit here and, maybe the next Warren Buffett is listening to this podcast right now. I don't want to sit here and like limit them supposedly. And that's why, it's fine to like, if you want to try out the stock picking game, like, be my guest, go for it. But at the very least, be smart about it. Start with, get your foundation built first, build that foundation, build a good size index fund portfolio first. And then, if you want to try it out, go with a smaller portion of your portfolio. Just do like 1%, 5%, test it out, see how you are, over a couple of years. If you continually outperform the market, then maybe you have some real skill. And then that's something that you can kind of like start to, sway your portfolio from the index funds more towards individual stocks. So like, it's not like we're like sitting here saying like, never, touch an individual stock. Like it's fine if you want to go that route. But at the same time, it's important to kind of put in the context and understand kind of just the game in general. It's a lot easier said to beat the stock market than actually done. So great points. And ultimately, I think this was a great podcast. Like I feel like we covered quite a bit. We've touched on the savings parts. We've touched on the concept of saving, and hopefully we've helped ignite that light bulb in some of your heads who are listening to this podcast into the importance of investing and ideally helping you kind of get pointed in the right direction. Because, the sooner you get started, the sooner you're going to be starting to soak in some information, soak in knowledge, build your skills. And the sooner you're actually going to start to be making money in the stock market. And, one of our big philosophy, kind of touching on Boffy's, point of like being a lazy investor, it's more of just like letting the stock market work for you, rather than sitting here wasting all your time staring at charts and trying to find the right company that's going to outperform or whatever. Like we want these companies to make us rich and we go enjoy our lives. I sit here for hours and hours, like basically changing to where like maybe you get yourself out of your job, but your new job becomes the stock market. You're clocking in 40 hours a week just sitting here. And if you want to do that, cool. But at the same time, I just want to kind of invest and enjoy life, like stack assets, enjoy life.
I like to sleep and make money. I like to sleep and the money's at work 24/7. That's the key. That's the cheat code, right? The money comes in and I just reroute it right back to work. It's like, no, you don't get breaks. I get breaks.
That's it. That's it. That's it right there. Well, hey, this has been a great podcast. And before we officially sign off, I just want to touch in with Pierce and Boffy as well one last time. Do either of you have any closing remarks? Maybe just some, a quick tip to somebody who, maybe they have more information about this game, how kind of like the beginning steps of investing, maybe, and just some additional insight to them. Boffy or Pierce, either of you can go first.
Yeah, I'll make it quick and brief. So and I know we touched a lot in that transition phase to investing, right? And so let's say somebody might be at that stage, or they might be getting past that stage, or at the beginning of that stage. You're going to get a lot of information from this podcast on that. And so once you cross that stage, the most important thing with the investing piece is to really make sure the foundation of your portfolios is built on index funds or ETFs, because that's extremely important. So maybe you might be new to the investing space now and you're getting some money out there. You see some individual stocks you're excited about. I would simply recommend just a simple asset allocation of having about 80 to 90% of the money in your portfolio go towards your index funds and ETFs, and maybe 10 to 20%, depending on your risk appetite, and assuming you've hit that savings mark where you don't have to save no more. 10 to 20% can go towards some of the individual companies you're interested in, because that can be a great learning opportunity for you as well. And it can also help add some extra fuel to what your ETFs and index is already going to do. And the index and ETFs are well diversified. You have that safety net. You protect your downside, but you also maximize your upside simultaneously. So 80% index funds / ETFs, 20% individual stocks. And then you can kind of shift that, you can shift the index higher, or kind of keep it around that range. Yep. That's it.
Powerful stuff. Pierce, how about yourself? Any last thoughts?
4 words: don't follow the hype.
Nice.
gotta-
Mic drop.
Yep.
It's, in so many cases, people are like, I'm family friends with the son of the son who his dad's the CEO of Citadel. And so during the GameStop frenzy, it was pretty interesting to see everything cumulatively going. And they lost an awful lot of money. And so I had friends who were buying in when GameStop was, I think, $200, $300, a share. And as it sits today, I don't even know where it's at. It's probably like 10 or $12. And so it's one of those things. Don't follow the hype. Do your research on these things and educate yourself before you invest even a dollar.
Well said, man. Well said. I guess my closing thoughts, we touched on a lot today. There's a lot to unpack in this podcast. And if you are a brand new investor, I think this would be a great podcast to re-listen to, right? Like there was a lot of stuff touched on here, a lot of different angles. And the one thing I'll say, just kind of summarizing, circling back to the savings versus investing, is any money that you are going to need within the next 5 years or less, that's money that should be saved. That's money that you want to kind of keep in a high yield savings account, in a money market account, in a CD, something that doesn't really have any like downside risk, like real downside risk. It's essentially going to ideally, a high yield savings account is going to help offset inflation a little bit. So you're going to kind of get rid of that inflation risk. But if you're going to need the money within the next 5 years, like maybe you're buying a house, maybe you want to buy a car, maybe you want to start your own business, whatever it is, like if you need access to that money within the next 5 years or less, that's not money you want to put in the stock market. That's money that you want to keep in the savings. Now, any money that you have just kind of sitting around that you're not going to need for 5 years or more, that's where we want to start talking about the investing stuff, right? This is more of the long-term game. Like if you have 5 years or longer, that's when you want to start throwing money into the stock market, because like that's the money that's the way where that money is really going to start working for you. Since, if it's just going to be sitting on the sidelines for 5 years, it can only earn so much in a high yield savings account. It can only earn so much in a money market fund. It can only earn so much in a CD. But if you have that timeline where you don't need that money for 5, 6, 7, 10 years, you can earn significantly more returns in the stock market, implementing a simple strategy, just like what we touched on today, like just index funds. Some of my favorite index funds I touched on already: VOO, QQQ. FXAIX is a mutual fund for the Fidelity fans out there. But yeah, start simple, but ultimately just try to clarify like with, what your short-term goals are, and decipher between, do I need this money now? Like if I have a lot of money sitting in my savings, first off, what's it for? And how soon will I need access to it? And using the guideline I just gave you, if it's 5 years or less, keep it in the high yield savings account. If you can go without it for 5 years or more, that's when you're going to want to jump into the investing game. I think that's going to help a lot of you out. And ultimately, I just want to say, be proud of yourself for spending the little over an hour listening to this stuff, because a lot of people don't ever spend the time learning about these important concepts. And everything you're learning today, if you actually implement it, is going to be stuff that completely changes the entire trajectory of your life and your family's life, and your future family's life, ideally as well, right? Because like all this information, like these are important concepts, and once you understand them, the cool part is that you can start to help other people understand them. And I actively encourage you to do so, because there is a massive financial literacy shortage in the world right now, and the more we can kind of close that gap and help other people understand financial concepts like what we've talked about today, the better I think society will get, and people will be able to like just move more happily throughout their lives, right? Because again, something I think the core theme of this podcast in general is, this isn't about your money. Buffy says this a lot. It's about your life. Money management is life management. So the sooner you start to understand that, the sooner you're going to be able to get money working in your favor, and with that, make your life a lot better. So that's a wrap for episode 18. This was a lot of fun. Don't forget, we have 17 other episodes now. So if this is your first time listening to our podcast, please, please, please go listen to that first one and just kind of go down that rabbit hole, start soaking down this information. And as always, if you have any feedback, we're always open ears. You can DM me at The Market Hustle. Bafi and Pierce's Instagram handles will be in the bio of the podcast. And that is a wrap for episode 18. We'll see you back in the next episode. Bye-bye.
If you feel just like I do, link up, come and join this crew. Ay, I'ma go invest and I'ma watch my money double. Take it to another level with that market hustle. Ay, always play it smart, you ain't dealing with a sucker. Take it to another level with that market hustle. I'ma hustle, ay, hustle with that market hustle. I'ma hustle, ay, hustle with that market hustle. I'ma hustle, hustle with that market hustle. I'ma hustle, hustle with that market hustle. Go.